Hello out there, welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel where we learn about top secret stuff, theories of everything that are esoteric and obscure, and today is video number 274 on the reciprocal system of theory. And the reciprocal system of theory is a theory of everything that was first authored by Dewey B. Larson. And he started his work way back in about 1930 and worked on it for the next 60 years until he died in 1990. About halfway through, he published his fundamental postulates, and from there started writing books. There are two fundamental postulates. The second one is less important than the first, but the second one is basically that the universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its magnitudes are absolute and its geometry is Euclidean. The first and by far most important postulate is that, paraphrasing, we don't live in a universe of matter, and we don't live in a universe of energy, but we live in a universe of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are basically the components of a fraction that is motion, or a ratio that is motion. And motion is a fraction that has either time or space as the numerator and either space or time as the denominator. All of our basic scientific quantities are forms of motion. Not only matter and energy, but also speed, which is pretty obvious. The car is moving 15 miles per hour, 15 miles of space, and 1 hour of time. So too with acceleration. I dropped the ball out the window and it fell at 9.8 meters per second squared. 9.8 meters of space in 1 second per second. Space over time squared. Now, this holds true for also things like pressure and viscosity and electrical capacitance, electrical charge, magnetic flux, permeability, permittivity. These are all forms of motion, and they are all representable exclusively in time or space relationships. There are three caveats to these fundamental postulates. The first is that space and time both have their coordinate aspects, meaning that space and time come in 3 dimensions. I would even go as far as to say 3 or 4 dimensions. And we are accustomed to the idea of space being 3-dimensional, but not so accustomed to the idea of time being 3-dimensional. But in certain circumstances, in actually half the circumstances, time is 3-dimensional, or 3 or 4 dimensional. And then the second caveat is that space and time also have their clock aspects. And the clock motion is a scalar motion, which is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no particular direction. And we recognize this in the clock of time. Time is always getting later and later and later and later. But it's not getting later in any particular direction or all directions. And we recognize that to be the case with time. But it is also the case with space in, again, 50% of the situations. Uh, Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. And you can envision this using a balloon with dots on it. You blow up the balloon, and all of the dots are moving away from each other, but in no particular direction. And this was also observed even before Larson's theory was published, or even before Larson came up with his theory. Back in the 1920s, the whole Hubble telescope detected that all of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. That is the scalar motion in space, or the flow of space, or the progression of space. And then the third caveat is that space and time only come in discrete units. There is a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time, below which you do not have space or time. If you don't have a full unit of space, you don't have space. And if you don't have a full unit of time, you don't have time. And if you don't have time, then you have space, because it's got to be one or the other, because the universe is made out of motion, and motion is the relationship between space and time. So it's got to be one or the other, or both. And so that creates, so that third caveat basically creates three boundaries in the universe. Because if you have exactly one unit of space in 1 unit of time, we've already established that space over time is speed. 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light. And Larson calls the speed of light unit speed. 1 over 1 equals 1. And so the speed of light is unit speed, and what that basically means, anything that is unit anything in the reciprocal system is at the center of the system. And on the positive end, you have 2, 3, 4, and 5. And on the negative end, you have 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5. That's a reciprocal system where it's multiplicative. The sides that balance, they balance by multiplying to 1, as opposed to a linear system that multiplies, that adds to 0. And so Larson says that the speed of light is not the maximum speed of the universe, as Einstein said, but that the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe, and that half of the universe is actually moving faster than the speed of light, which is a realm that legacy scientists know very, very little about, if anything. And then there is half the universe that we're familiar with, that Larson calls the material sector, where everything is moving slower than the speed of light. And in this realm that's moving slower than the speed of light, we have our familiar coordinate space, 3-dimensional space, and clock time. The time is progressing. It's always getting later and later and later. But by the reciprocal postulate, if we cross over the speed of light boundary, we go to what Larson calls the cosmic sector, where everything's moving faster than the speed of light, and we have coordinate time, 3 or more dimensions of time, and clock space, progressing space. It's always getting farther and farther and farther apart. So that shows the reciprocal relationship. And it also enables us to extrapolate what we know about the material sector onto what we know about the cosmic sector. All we have to do is invert the roles of space and time, and we get exactly what's going on in the cosmic sector. Now, the other two boundaries that are created by the unit space and unit time. Now, remember, the third caveat is that if you don't have a full unit of space, then you don't have space, and you only have time. And that is what Larson calls the time region. The time region is within the material sector. And if you don't have a full unit of space, if it's in a region where you're talking about a region of less than 1 unit of space, and 1 unit of space is approximately 4.5 times 10 to the minus 8 meters, so it's microscopic. But compared to the size of an atom, it's very large. And within that region, you only have time. And so Larson calls it the time region, and this is the realm of atomic physics and molecular interactions. And then same thing in the cosmic sector, but that is with time. If you are in the realm of less than 1 unit of time, then you only have space. So Larson calls that the space region. 1 unit of time is the incredibly small amount of 1.5 times 10 to the minus 16 seconds. So in every second, there are over 6 quadrillion units of time. But if you have less than one of those units, everything is space. And this is the realm of cosmic matter, cosmic atomic physics, and cosmic molecular interactions. What legacy science calls antimatter interactions. And so those are really the three boundaries that you're talking about: a middle boundary, and then a small region boundary within each of the two sectors on the other sides of the middle boundary. You can use the Taoist Tajitu, with the yin yang, the circle with the wave in between, and the two dots on either side. That is a representation of the reciprocal system, according to Larson's two postulates. And so he took those two postulates and he developed an entire theoretical universe from them using a process of deduction. You can go back about 6-7 months and watch my 15 videos that I did on his deductive development of the reciprocal system. He goes through about 165 steps of deduction to deduce his, books on chemistry and physics and astronomy and so on. Now, Larson did a great job with those books, and they are must-reads, in my opinion, even though they're super difficult, just to kind of keep up with his language, and because he's having to almost invent a new language in some cases, and just because you have to unlearn certain chemistry and physics concepts that you might have learned in high school or college. But Larson writes well, and if you are patient and you go through those books slowly, you'll learn a lot. But he did make some mistakes, as he, admitted that he was subject to error. He said that the theory itself is correct, but whether I have derived the theory correctly, where I've applied the theory correctly, is another matter. I may have made some mistakes, and if I did, they will eventually show up, and you will be able to detect them. And so some people have come up behind Larson and corrected some of his mistakes, especially Dr. Bruce Perret and Dr. KVK Nehru, who come up with something that's called RS2, the Reciprocal System 2, the reevaluation of the reciprocal system. And we're looking at a reading here from Dr. Perret, who also writes under the pen name of Daniel Phoenix III when he's kind of being speculative with the reciprocal system. And we're reading an article that he wrote called Time and timelines. And so he will give us a little bit of inkling about time, especially in the reciprocal system where the time is coordinate, or at least the time has its coordinate aspect. And we read this, we're going to start with this paragraph, which we read in the last one, but it's an important paragraph, so we're going to start over there, and then we're going to go from there. Now, this is, I believe, the third installment of this particular paper, and so if you want to start at the beginning, you'll want to go back 2 videos to watch. But we're going to start here in the middle. As a result, the incorrect concept of time being linear and vectorial, the arrow of time stuff, predominates scientific thought and is taught in all the schools. So people never think beyond that box in order to understand the timelines. One must understand 3D time as a temporal landscape. And in that landscape, the future is what is in front of you, and the past is what is behind you. The present is where you are standing in the temporal landscape. And I would like to clarify that the present does not change. If you were to freeze your presence in the moment called now, you would be eternal. But it would also be rather boring, as nothing would ever change. So, when considering the concept of past, present, and future, try thinking of it as an orientation in a 3-dimensional temporal landscape. And your position is constantly shifting, ever so slightly, even when you believe you are still. Consider the implications of this scenario. Just like in space, no 2 people can exist at the same point in coordinate time. There is always some separation. This infers that each person's view of the past and future is slightly different. The general features of the terrain, mountains, rivers, valleys, etc., can be agreed upon, but things up close can have a radically different perspective. If 2 people turn to face each other, then they are destined to meet in the future, what is in front of them, just a few temporal steps away. Now consider the psionic side, or the psychic, metaphysical, or ESP side in space. We can see a car a half a mile away driving down a road leading towards us and consider it normal in time. I'm just looking at his footnotes to see if anything needs to be explained. Okay, in time, if one sees a car heading towards us in the temporal landscape, we call it precognition. Precognition is the ability to see a distance, technically a duration, in the coordinate time landscape. Larson's concept of clock space. If you and I were standing 10 seconds apart in that temporal landscape, that car might hit you and miss me, even though we predicted an impact, because we both saw it heading our way. We could discuss the approaching car, and people in the spatial realm would think we are telepathic, because we are standing right next to each other in time, and our spatial bodies could be miles apart. The timelines are just a larger view of the same system. Rather than people on the landscape, consider towns and villages or collectives that, due to their temporal proximity, will share a similar past and future, but not necessarily identical. When a timeline is created, what has happened is that someone hired a temporal bulldozer and alerted the terrain, and altered the terrain with a TVG, which was a temporal vector generator. you can target a specific feature of that terrain and with appropriate resonance, flatten a hill, change the course of a river, or build a mountain. You have not changed the course of anyone living in the temporal landscape, but now they have to work around the modified features of the landscape. Suppose you are driving down the road to work, but today someone dropped a tree across the road. Rather than deal with the alteration of the terrain, odds are you will just turn around and take another route, an alternate route, or in the temporal landscape, an alternate timeline. Because the tree was in front of you, you consciously changed your future by taking a different route. And by taking that route, you will encounter many new things and situations that you would not have encountered on the old route. Now, here's the surprise consequence. There is no temporal law that says you cannot get out of your car, move the tree, and continue along the route you wanted to follow in the first place. It creates an inconvenience, but is not insurmountable. Once you know what is coming, you don't have to still be in the way once it gets here. If you were standing on a street, looked up, and saw a piano falling out a 10-story window right above you, would you just scream, "The end is near," and get squashed? Or just step out of the way? If you remain ignorant, you'll just follow the crowd around the obstacles placed by those that formed the timeline, going where they wanted you to go. Let's face it, people are lazy and will usually take the easiest path. And that is how they keep control, the cabal, that is, how they keep control, providing easy paths, not only in timelines, but in politics, legality, economics, food, fuel, just about anything you can name. Odds are you never even knew there was a choice. Those who wake up have a choice. Implementing the choice is another matter. Okay, this section is called The Illusion of Reality. In a communication with David Wilcock, he stated, now remember that Dr. Perrett and David Wilcock were housemates together for quite a while, and David Wilcock was schooled on the reciprocal system, even though I think Perrett maybe overestimates the amount that he really understands about the system, because I haven't read all of Wilcock's stuff. I read a lot of his stuff way, way, way back 20 years ago when he wasn't even writing books, where he was just putting stuff out on the internet. But I don't necessarily feel that he has a very good understanding of the reciprocal system. I believe Perrett referred to his understanding of the reciprocal system as fundamental. So he understands the fundamental aspects of the reciprocal system, but I don't think he really understands the specifics of it. But anyway, in a communication with David Wilcock, he stated, "I had two different insiders tell me that the reality we experience is a consensus that is driven by our perception and thought to varying degrees. They explain that it is a very classified secret that both mirrors and magnifying glasses can break through that. We can see a ghost, for example, in a mirror, even though our perception will not allow it to be there if we see it right in front of us." Then the other insider said that when you put two mirrors facing each other, it gets even more interesting, and that this was very, very, very sensitive information. You have to remember that most insiders don't know, as the experts, they get their information from don't know either. Delen's comment about news reporters is applicable here. I think Delen is from Stargate 1, but I'm not sure. Delen's comment about news reporters is applicable here. That which you do know, you do not understand. That which you do not know, you invent. I didn't know until I became an outsider, and several of us former insiders started comparing notes and going, what the heck? It took decades of research to get to the point where we have a viable model of what is going on. There is a lot of confusion that arises with the concept of parallel universes or timelines. From what we found, it would be better expressed as potential universes that are generated by a type of consensus reality. But you have to understand that it is not a general consensus. It requires knowledge of how bioenergy works and some of the concepts promoted by Franz Mesmer in the late 1700s. When people believe the reality, it reinforces the pattern. That is why social norms are considered so important these days. A consensus reinforcement. If people thought for themselves, those potential realities would collapse. Regarding mirrors, these techniques used to be referred to as fairy stones. And for things like mirrors, it depends highly on the composition. The reflective surface must be a heavy metal, like the old silverback mirrors. The aluminum mirrors, common these days, that are much cheaper, don't really work. The heavier isotope of silver contains a good quantity of captured neutrinos, which in a charged state can reflect a portion of coordinate time structure into coordinate space. You can put two silver mirrors facing each other, one with full reflection and one partial, and you basically have a ghost laser, where the pattern undergoes light amplification between the two mirrors as in the old laser setups. If people have a clear understanding of the afterlife, those in power would lose their ability to control through fear. Can't have that, can we? Okay, that's the end of that section. The next section is called Project Camelot Video with Dan Burrish. And we will check that out tomorrow. But thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.